learning plans. We are also, I should say, giving guidance on the current rules, not either audit findings from last year, or there are some of you that are going through audits right now. We're really not talking about audit issues in this. If you have questions about that, we can point you in the right direction, but just want to be clear about what we're doing. So what we're going to do today is just go over the student learning plan. We're going to talk about the rules, and then, like I said, opening it up for Q&A. We have a question window, and so if you have questions, feel free to type it into the window, and then we will try to address all the questions that come in. And we actually already have a question. Is it possible to get a printout of the slides? I suppose, but the slides it's only like 2 or 3 more slides, and then I'm going to switch over to the website and go through the rules, and so this is not a long, detailed slide deck. So you may not want a printout of the slides, but we'd be happy to give you what we've got.
And Carl, just to add that we are recording the session, or attempting to record the session, so that would be available as well.
Yeah. So with that, I wanted to give you a few contacts in terms of who to talk to if you have any sort of ALE questions. So I put the contact info for the 2 of us up there. In general, I would say that email is probably the best way to contact us. Obviously, the phone is fine too. I put our main line in there. That'll get you to either one of us. If you have ALE enrollment reporting questions, especially if you need to make changes or questions about the monthly ALE enrollment reports, your contact for that's going to be Becky McLean. And then for audit resolution issues, Jennifer Carrower is the contact there. So with that, let's start talking about student learning plans. So when I think about ALE, I really think about it in terms of 3 key elements. There's the student learning plan, the weekly contact, the monthly evaluation. There's obviously a lot of detail and a lot of other rules and regulations. But those are kind of the the heart of what ALE is, and so that's why we're obviously going to start this month by focusing on the student learning plans. Some of this is driven by the audit issues that the State Auditor's Office has uncovered, and I pulled some stats from their overall ALE audit report. There's a link down at the bottom. If you haven't seen this. It's probably not a bad idea to go take a look at it just to get an idea of what sort of issues existed across the state. It's also, I believe it's still linked to from the homepage of the State Auditor's Office website, so you can get it that way if you don't want to type in that long URL. But what they found specifically on learning plans was in about 6% of the districts, they just flat out didn't have learning plans. That's obviously a problem. I don't even think I need to comment further on that. 16% were claiming funding for students outside of when the student learning plan start or end date indicated that they could claim. 27% didn't either estimate the hours on the learning plan, or they claimed FTE at a higher rate than the hours would indicate. And then 31% didn't have the learning plans approved by a certificated teacher, and then 33% didn't identify instructional material. So we're going to talk about each one of those requirements, but I wanted to kind of start by saying that the things that we're going to talk about here in terms of what needs to be in the learning plan, these are things that show up in audit findings if they're not done correctly. So that's why this matters. So that's the end of my slideshow. And so I'm going to switch over to our DLD website. I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger. And where I'm going to go is into the annotated ALE rules. Find that from the home page there, and the entire ALE rule is kind of laid out here. I'm going to actually start in section 4 of the rules. This is where each one of those 3 key parts of ALE, this is where the requirement actually lives. So you see 4A is on the learning plan, 4B is on weekly contact, 4C is on monthly progress evaluation. So we're going to stay up here, and I'm going to try to make the text a little bit bigger, hoping that that makes it a little bit easier for you guys to see. So we're going to start here in 4A, where, and this isn't going to come to a shock, or come as a shock to most of you, but each student in an ALE must have a student learning plan. And that needs to be developed by a certificated teacher. And it needs to be designed to meet the student's individual educational needs. I want to also just emphasize that you need to have a certificated teacher who has the responsibility and accountability for each course specified on the plan. That includes supervision, that includes monitoring and evaluation and documentation of student progress. We have been talking to a fair number of folks who are actually a bit confused on this and think that there can be a community-based instructor or a non-cert or a parent educator who is responsible for for the courses, and the rules I think pretty clearly say that needs to be a teacher who is obviously certificated. So with that, I want to go into the definition of what a student learning plan is. And you can get there either through that link, or I'm going to actually back up and kind of show you where it is here. It's in section 3C. This was one of the sections that had a slight modification when we redid the rules. I shouldn't say redid. When we amended the rules last year, this was not one where there was a major change made. I think it was the addition of just a few words. There are really 8 components to the student learning plan. We start off by again saying that the student learning plan needs to be developed and approved by a cert teacher. This is essentially reiterating what we just saw in the other part of the rule, section 4. And then the student learning plan must include at least the following elements. So you can go above and beyond this. You can put more things in the learning plan, but these are the must-haves. So the first is the beginning and end date for the student's ALE experience. So at this point, I'm actually going to pop over to section 7 of the rules. This is around enrollment reporting. So one of the things it says here is on the first enrollment count date on or after the start date specified in the student learning plan, it's at that point that you can count the student for state funding. And so that's why that start date is so important. And if you don't have a start date, or you've made the start date, for example, after a count date where you've claimed the student, that's when you can get in trouble down the road, because essentially you've claimed the student without having the learning plan in place first. Okay, so I'm going to pop back to section 3C. And then, of course, you'll want the end date. And I do see a question. Our student learning plan should be aligned to section 3C 1 to 8. Yes, that is definitely the bottom line in that if you have a learning plan that doesn't have these 8 elements in it, that's a problem. Okay, so all of these 8 elements need to be in place. Okay, so you're going to want the beginning date, you're going to want the end date of the ALE, And so obviously you're not going to want to claim a student under ALE when you don't have a learning plan in place. So if the learning plan's ended and you're still claiming them, that can also be a problem. The second requirement is the estimate of the average number of hours per school week the student will engage in learning activities. So there's a few interesting things that I want to point out here. First of all, this is how you calculate FTE. This is how you figure out how you're going to claim, the student. So, for example, for a high school student, 25 hours a week is a 1.0. So if you estimate on the learning plan the student's going to be spending 25 hours, then they're a 1.0. If you estimate 20 hours, they're 0.8, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's also important to point out that this is an estimate. So, we're not tracking actual hours here. We're just talking about when you created the plan, what is your estimate for how long the student's going to spend? We do want to scope that estimate to the time the student's engaging in those learning activities that are essentially in the student learning plan. So that's another kind of important thing to not estimate hours for things that aren't on the plan. We do occasionally get some questions about that. I'm seeing a fair number of questions popping in, and I want to make sure I don't get too far ahead of those questions. So are there any questions here that we should address now, Susan?
So we had the one come in about the start date on the learning plan says September 1st and the count date is September 5th, but the signature from parent student was September 8th, and so we have that FAQ that explains the evidence that the student started the plan.
Right. So let me see if I can find that FAQ.
It might be.
I'm going to make everybody slightly nauseous by scrolling through here. Sorry about that. Do you think it's on this page or is it on
I think it's on enrollment actually. Can take note of that and come back to that one if we can't find it.
Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and we'll track down that. Someone asked, is there any way to see the questions people are asking? Not really. We will try to read out the ones that we can. In the case of a high school student receiving credit, does the student have to track hours to match the estimated hours on the student learning plan? No, I don't think so, unless you have some goofy credit requirements in your local district. I don't think so. Are we accountable to the funded, sorry, are we accountable to the funded hours or the estimated hours? If we include more hours than required, does that then affect any other requirements? I'm not sure I'm fully understanding that question. Let's see. The estimated hours should be the funded hours.
Yeah.
And so I'm not understanding why they would be different. Maybe the person who asked that question can help clarify that. Sorry, if you enroll a student on April 18th and then the enrollment count date in May, are you revising April as well as counting May? You revise April's count date to include the student. Okay, so if you have a student that comes in mid-month, so after the count date, can you go back and claim them for that month? The answer is no. You can claim them at the next count date. But so if they've come in mid-April, you can claim them for May, but not for April. When is the soonest that teachers can improve student learning plans for the fall? There's kind of a, I'm not going to give a real solid answer on that one, I think, but I think it's problematic to have teachers approving learning plans, say, now for next fall. I think you'd really want to see that the student has completed or mostly completed their current learning plan before a new one is created. So I would expect it to be in the last few weeks of school. So that would be about the earliest. We require students to be on campus in classes approximately 15 hours a week. Expectation is they're completing coursework at home, which we obviously can't monitor. Is that okay? Okay, so that's a great question. How do you account for time the student's not in school? So you're not actually able to see them, right? And so this goes back to you're creating a student learning plan with all these goals and objectives, and your estimate is for the amount of time that the student's going to spend to do that regardless of where they are. Even though they may be at home or outside of school, you're estimating how long it's going to take for the student to do that work. Okay, if the student doesn't work the estimated hours noted on the student learning plan but has produced sufficient quality work for the month, is that okay? That's a good question. So we don't have a system where we track actual hours, okay? And so if it looks like you have a student who is working a lot faster than you had expected or something like that, you may want to consider modifying the learning plan, but you don't necessarily need to adjust the funding, just because the student is working a little less. We do have the FAQ to answer that earlier question around September. And so what we've said here, and this is small, so I'm going to make it a little bit larger. And of course, in doing that, I lost. There it is. Okay, so in September, you need to have an approved student learning plan with the start date within the first 4 days of the school year. And there needs to be some documented evidence of student participation in the ALE courses. And so that could mean direct personal contact. That could mean the student had in-person instructional contact or that online instructional contact. Could mean the student has actually physically signed the learning plan, or I guess electronically signed the learning plan, or the student has started to work in an online course. Some sort of evidence that that the students actually started to implement that learning plan. Okay, I'm going to try to move on just because I want to make sure that I get through all 8 components of the learning plan. And we're going to come back and capture some of these other questions a little bit later. And I have a feeling more will continue to pour in. Because I'm also getting the impression I could sit here and just answer questions on the first 2 items for the hour. So, but keep sending the questions in, and we will we'll get to that. So, section 3, or III, I guess. This is a description of how weekly contact is going to be done. So, you want to lay out in that plan so it's really clear to the student, and if it's a younger student, to the student's parents, how that weekly contact is going to occur. Is it going to occur through direct personal contact via email or via phone or in-person meetings, or attendance in a class, or whatever it actually looks like? You just want to be specific about how the student is going to do that. This is one of those things that's a kind of an informational component, and for the students, so they're very clear on it. And it's also, I think, an example of how the learning plan is really that foundational document for ALE. It's the place where all the information about what the student should be doing is, and so yeah. Section 4, this is one where we actually get a fair number of questions. The rules say that you need to provide a description of each ALE course included as a part of the learning plan, and there should be a fair amount of specificity here. So we're looking for specific learning goals, objectives, activities for each course, and this next part I think is really, really key. You need to write these in a way that helps to facilitate the monthly evaluation. So we get lots of questions about, like, well, how do we do that monthly evaluation? What are we supposed to look for? Well, the answer is, if you constructed this part of the learning plan correctly, doing the monthly evaluation should be really straightforward, because you've got the goals laid out there, you've got the objectives laid out there, and you're taking a look at the end of the month. How did the student do against the goals they were supposed to, meet? If you don't have this, laid out well, then I think we get into kind of convoluted, questions about what should be a part of the monthly evaluation. For ALE programs that are using more what I would call traditional courses, either online or not, if you have an individual course syllabus or some other in-depth thing that explains what the course is, you should be able to either attach that to the learning plan and just refer to it, or do a little copy and paste into the learning plan. And so that's a way that I think it's a bit easier for those folks to meet this particular requirement, just because they're not going to be creating this from scratch every time. You can use an existing thing. So
Carl, did you?
Again,
sorry.
The description needs to identify requirements. Yeah.
So did you see the question about when will we get the Cedars numbers that indicate courses are ALE?
I saw the question. So let's talk about the Cedars stuff first. So on the learning plan, you need to identify the courses using a course code that's going to allow your student information system to have that ALE course information flow into Cedars. And if it's an online course, you're going to want to indicate that it's an online course, because that's another thing that gets tracked and captured. In terms of where to get those numbers, that's something that you guys as a district are going to decide what the appropriate course code is, and you're going to put that in the SIS. And so maybe I'm not sure I understand the question. If you think you understand it better than I do, Susan, feel free to jump in.
No, I think we need more information on that one.
Okay.
So, and Carl, there's a question about the syllabus. Is it enough to have it available online on the school webpage so we don't waste paper? And I think the important aspect of that is whether it is retrievable later for review and whether the students had access to it. Obviously, if it's on the webpage, the students would. But it's fine to have an electronic copy. It just has to be available at a point of review later on, correct?
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Where I would be concerned is if you were, for example, linking to course information on, let's just say, an online provider's website. Now, those online providers, they're going to update that website. They're going to change the course syllabus. They're going to, I don't know, go out of business, right? There's all kinds of stuff that can happen. So you need to make sure that you're keeping a local copy. You don't have to print the thing out on paper, but it needs to be available when the auditors show up, and it needs to be the version that the student actually was working under. So I'm all in favor of keeping things electronically. You just need to make sure that you're not relying on a third party to essentially retain that information for you.
And I'll just pitch in here. Another common question that we get is whether there needs to be signatures on the learning plan, and there is not a requirement that the student sign the learning plan or the parent. However, it can be useful in documenting that it was delivered by direct personal contact.
Yeah. We've had a few folks asking questions about the course codes, and we don't have the Cedars course codes. We have said that a program can put down a district course code on the learning plan as long as you can crosswalk that later to the Cedars course codes. This is the sort of thing where you're going to want to talk to whoever's in charge of student information within your school district. Oh, my phone is ringing. Sorry, I should turn that off. Excuse me. So you're going to want to make sure you talk to whoever is in charge of student information to try to figure out how to get the right course codes. That should be a solvable problem. Okay, any other quick questions we should address, Susan?
There's a question that says, can the learning plan inclusive of the syllabi be a portfolio?
We don't care what form the learning plan takes as long as it meets the rules. And I'm going to throw one other caveat in there. As long as it's in a form that the auditors can kind of easily work with when they show up. I think one of the things I've heard from the auditors is that they worked with some school districts where it was really complicated to pull all the information together into one place so they could review it because it was kept all over the place in all sorts of different ways, and it was just very, very convoluted. And so I think you want to be as organized as you possibly can. And if it makes sense in your district to think of that as a portfolio, that's fine. I know there are lots of districts that use online tools to manage this. I think that's fine. So like I said, I don't necessarily care the form that it takes as long as you're actually meeting, all of the, requirements here. Okay, I see like 5 or 6 other questions have popped in while I said that. So I'm going to keep going, and we will loop back and answer some of those questions in a few minutes. 5, identification of the Cert teacher responsible for each course that's included as a part of the plan. So again, this needs to be the Cert teacher is responsible, not a non-Cert, not a community-based instructor, not a paraeducator, not a parent. It needs to be a Cert teacher who's responsible for each course on the plan. In section 6, you want to identify all of the instructional materials that will be used to complete the learning plan. So one of the audit issues that we saw a fair amount was people who would use a real generic phrase like, I don't know, various instructional materials or something like that. And that's really not good enough. You need to be specific about the instructional materials that the student is going to need for the learning plan. That could mean that you're listing the specific textbooks or the specific online tools or, whatever it is that the kid's going to need. You have to list them there. this is also, one of those things where if you think about the learning plan as kind of, the agreement between the student and the school about what the student's going to do, and this is the place where we're collecting all the information about what the student's going to do, you need to communicate to the kid what they need, to use, and this is the spot where you do that. So the next section, description of the timelines and methods for evaluating student progress. So again, this is kind of getting into how are we going to do that monthly evaluation and on what sort of timeline. But this could also include other sort of things like, this is when this assignment's due, this is when this exam is going to occur, and there's some courses that are going to have more detail here. There are others, just because of how they're structured, that are not going to have as much detail here. Again, you want to make this as clear as you can to the student what they're supposed to be doing when. And then the last one is essentially identifying if the course meets state standards. And for high school courses, you do need to specify, whether that course is going to meet state and district graduation requirements. You want to probably be pretty careful about offering high school courses that are not credit-bearing, i.e., not meeting state and district graduation requirements. So, yeah, I think that's about all I'll say on that. So those are the 8 components of the student learning plan. You see how they kind of fit together and again, act as the foundational ALE document. So we have had a ton of questions pop in as I did those last few items. So where should we start, Susan?
Well, there are a number of questions about the certificated teacher and HQ. Is that something you want to tackle right now, or is that scheduled later?
Well, let's talk about the cert teacher. There's some nuances with HQ that I don't think we're going to have time to dive into, but I think a few of these questions we can answer. So, does the cert teacher need to be highly qualified in each content area they are managing on the plan? Okay, so there's a difference between managing and teaching a course. Okay, so I want to draw that distinction pretty clearly. So let's first answer the, do they have to be highly qualified for each course that they are teaching? The answer is yes, if it's a core academic course. And note that almost everything but like health, PE, and I think like CTE courses are considered core academic. So that's art, that's music, that's all sorts of stuff, right? For the teacher that you put down, when you've identified the cert teacher responsible for each course, those cert teachers are going to need to be highly qualified in those core academic courses. Now, let's talk about managing. So you're going to usually have one individual who's kind of managing the entire plan. So let's just think about this in terms of like a high school course, or sorry, a high school student, where a high school student might be in 5 or 6 different courses. The cert teacher that you have who's kind of overseeing the plan and doing the monthly evaluation, they do not need to be HQ in all 5 or 6 content areas. They do need to be a cert teacher, but it would be very difficult to find someone who was HQ, across the board. So we just say you have to have the cert, not HQ, to manage the plan. The teachers have to be HQ to teach, not to manage. Did that make sense? I ask to a bunch of people who can't tell me if that made sense because we've closed all of your mics. Well, I hope that made sense. If not, throw a question. Thank you. Somebody said it made sense in the chat window. Great. Okay, so that answered, I hope, a couple of the HQ questions, and I'm looking to see if there are some others. Okay, there's one here about online teachers. So it's pretty common to have an online certificated teacher who's actually teaching the class and not your local teacher. But there's been a lot of confusion about which teacher do you put down as responsible for the course, which teacher do you enter into the SIS, which teacher gets entered into Cedars. The answer is it's the online teacher. They are the certificated, highly qualified teacher that's responsible for that course. Okay, other questions? What do we have, Susan?
There are some about the methods of evaluation. It says, what is the difference between 7 and 4 in terms of methods of evaluating? If 4 asks us to write the learning plan to identify progress, and that will be evaluated, how is it different in 7? And then another question said, go back to 7 and talk about the methods part. So questions about the methods of evaluation.
Okay. So section 4 up here is really focused on goals, objectives, and activities. And it's not really speaking to kind of how that evaluation is taking place. So section 7, though, is where you might say you're going to be evaluated monthly. And I know there are lots of ALE programs that do this on a real set schedule. So your evaluation date is the 24th of every month, or something like that. So that would be an example of kind of the timeline aspect of that. But then, in terms of the methods, you could say, you can start to specify that you're going to use, the progress towards specific objectives or goals. You may specify that you're going to use, grades from an online tool, or the percent of a course that's been completed. I know there's a number of folks that are using online content that say we're expecting students to complete X% of the course each month or each week. This is where you could also, I think, add in expectations around student contact and things like that. I think we've often had the question about, so I have an ALE student who's in 5 courses and they're making progress in 4 of them but not in the 5th course. Do I have to say that that's unsatisfactory progress for the month? And so this is, I think, your opportunity to, if you've decided for this particular student that making satisfactory progress might look like they're doing well in 4 out of their 5 courses. Like, if that's progress for this student, then I think it'd be okay to write that in there. Do you have anything to add to that? Feel free to jump in, Susan.
Yep, I've got half my head in another question here.
Oh, sorry.
But sounded good.
Okay. Well, I hope that addressed the question from the questioner. Okay, other questions. Yeah, and I think the one last thing I'll say on the Section 4 versus Section 7 is there's a certain amount of overlap. They're both talking about evaluation. And there are times, I think, in the ALE rules where you'll see something emphasized more than once. And it's just there to kind of remind people. It occasionally doesn't hurt to kind of overemphasize things. So that's also some of what's going on there.
I guess what I will add is there are some questions that are coming in that are pretty specific, and we're very happy to answer those. I'm responding to some saying, just email me. We will put our contact information back up at the end of the webinar and can send more information out. So if your question doesn't get answered, no worries. You can still submit it. We'll follow up with those that have come in, or if you get the response from me about email me directly, we'll get answers.
We had an interesting question that is kind of alluding to the legislature, and I think most of you know that there's still an ALE bill alive and kicking in the legislature, 5794. And so the question was, will these 8 components change for next year? I think the answer is probably not. I think if there's a bill that does end up passing, we will need to obviously update the ALE rules. And so there may be some tweaks here and there. We may change some of the words. But the concepts behind these 8 items here, I don't see those changing dramatically. This one may change a little bit simply because 5794 has a requirement that all high school courses be offered for credit. So we would probably, for example, remove that line. But the concept, I think, is still there. The rest of these, I think, are going to be largely unchanged. There is a requirement that individual ALE courses be reported as ALE courses into Cedars. So right now there's no indicator that says that either a student is ALE or a school is an ALE program, or a course is ALE. And there's been a change, so actually, regardless of if this bill actually goes into law or not, we still want school districts to report to us that these are ALE courses. That's going to make it incidentally a heck of a lot easier for us to understand at a state level what's going on out there in the ALE world. Right now, we don't have the data foundation to kind of track where students are going and who students are, even, or whether or not ALE programs are being effective or not, or if there are some models that are more effective than others. We just don't have any way to get into that right now. So that's why we've made that change. Okay, other questions?
Yeah. My ear may have been in another question. Did you clarify whether the HQT needed to make the monthly evaluation or not, or whether that management role versus the Cert? We have a couple of questions just asking for clarification on that.
Yeah, I thought I did. I'm tempted at this point to bring up the HQT memo.
Okay.
Which is right here. And I'm going to try to make this a little bit bigger. And I'm going to bring up the now famous chart of the teacher roles. So you see we have 2 columns, one for teacher Cert, one for HQT. And so when we're talking about who's responsible for student learning, HQT is required. who's developing the student learning plan for that course. And that's kind of a complicated way of I guess, phrasing that. The idea is if there are multiple courses on the student learning plan, the component of, let's just say, a math course that's on the learning plan, that should be developed by someone who's HQ in math. What we're trying to avoid is having someone who's HQ in like English be the one developing the math course on the learning plan. But when we get down to responsible for overall monthly progress reviews, so this is that kind of management role that we were talking about before. This is where they still have to be a cert teacher, but it's optional that they're HQT. Again, because you're not going to necessarily find lots of HQT teachers that are going to be HQ in all of the content areas that are going to be on a learning plan. And then things like completing weekly contact, that can be done by any one of those HQ teachers in any given course, but it doesn't matter kind of which course and which HQ does that, so we've said that HQT is optional there. For that kind of overall management role, again, have to be cert, but you don't have to be HQ. And this final one is ensuring the student learning plan meets the conditions. Again, that's that kind of management role. So that's also optional there. So hopefully that answered that question. Other questions that we have not yet addressed?
Hang on here, sorry. Some people are asking for a link to that email, so I'm going to send that out to that bulletin. Yeah, so I'll send that out right now to everybody. So this is a link to that memo that Carl is referring to. There we go.
So while she puts that in, we had a question. So the online provider's teacher's name is written on the student learning plan for teaching and grading, but the manager of the student learning plan is the one who evaluates monthly progress. So the answer to that is yes, that model would be fine. I mean, it's going to depend. There are some online ALE programs that would have the online teacher do the management. But if you're talking about where you have kind of a local teacher who's managing the learning plan and then a bunch of online teachers actually teaching the courses, then that's fine too. You're obviously going to put down the online teacher as the teacher of each individual course, and then you have your local teacher is the one who's managing it, and they don't have to be HQ in every content area. I think I answered does the weekly progress review and monthly evaluation need to be done by an HQT? Do performance objectives need to be specified by month, or can they just be written as course performance objectives? They can be written as course performance objectives, but you're going to want to figure out a way to do that so that facilitates the monthly evaluation. And I know that was kind of a vague answer, but the reality is that different types of ALE programs, different types of ALE courses are going to handle that in different ways. So you're going to have some courses that are going to be very, very regimented, and there are others that are going to be less so. And so we're not saying that you have to structure a course in one way or the other. We're just saying that you need to structure in a way that you can evaluate the students' work.
And that the student understands what they need to do to make satisfactory progress.
Yes. Okay, in regards to 4 and 7, can we say the student learning plan C monthly report? So, okay, so I think the question is basically, do we have to specify how it's done in the learning plan, or can we just refer to the actual documentation of student progress towards the goals? The answer to that is the idea in the learning plan is you specify how you're going to do the evaluation and what you're going to evaluate against. And then the idea when you're actually doing it and you're going to have a bunch of documentation that you're going to collect around that, whether it's grades or reports from the parents or notes from from meeting with with the student, you're still going to document and maintain that as a part of the monthly progress, and that's different than explaining up front kind of how you're going to do the work. Okay. Taking a look at the questions here, we've got a lot of them in here, so I'm trying to figure out which one to answer next. Okay, so if the managing teacher for a grade 7 student doing math at home is highly qualified in language arts, who would be listed as the certificated teacher for the math portion of the student learning plan, which is being completed solely at home? Boy.
There may be more to that one than...
Oh, is there more?
Well, I was... that one, yeah, I'd be happy to answer that question if he wanted to email me, and I'll respond to that. I think there might be more to that.
Okay. Yeah. So there may be more to that specific question. I do kind of want to address it at a high level, I guess, because as I'm kind of reading that sounds like a problematic model, and that's because even if the course is being done at home, and by that I mean I'm assuming that is a course where the parent is very actively involved, there still needs to be a specific certificated and in most cases highly qualified teacher that is responsible for that course. And it's that teacher that's going to be essentially driving this aspect of it. And it's that teacher that is going to be involved with, with the evaluation. That specific teacher for that course may or may not be doing, the weekly contact. The kid may be getting contact in a different course, but they certainly could be getting it done there. I guess I want to go back to section 4 and just kind of, reiterate, a certificated teacher must have responsibility and accountability for each course specified in the plan, including supervision and monitoring and evaluation and documentation of students' progress. This is true even if it's a course, again, where the kid is spending most of their time at home and the parent is very actively involved. Now, if you can't figure out a way to make that work, I would almost say that the best thing to do would be to not include that course on the student learning plan. Don't claim for that, and consider that, and have that student do like intent to homeschool for that course. If you can't figure out a way to have an HQ Cert teacher who has responsibility, accountability, et cetera, for that course, then I think that's going to be a problem. Okay, questions keep piling in. We have just a couple minutes. I did want to limit this time to about an hour. I know you guys are real busy. I have other things I need to run off and do here this afternoon too. We're going to capture all the questions that came in, and if we didn't answer them now, we will get back to you over email. And I am going to also put back up our contact information here. Ugh, sorry. There we go, contact information. So you can see that. I really do encourage you, if you have any questions, to send us an email or give us a phone call, and we will help you out. So, like I said, it's just about 10:30. I'd be interested, I think, in in your feedback about, like, is this a useful thing? Do we need to do more of these? Obviously, we have one more on the calendar. We could look at doing additional ones. I'll also say that if we have any law changes that lead to rule changes, we will definitely absolutely do all sorts of outreach. We'll do webinars. We may or may not be able to get some face-to-face things going, and just try to spread the word as much as we can.
The next webinar is May 20th, Monday, May 20th.
Yeah. So I know that there are lots of questions about things like HQ. So we may try to pull together an HQ one at some point. I also realize that for a lot of you, we're starting to run short on this school year, having a month and a half to 2 months left. So, and I also know that spring is a really, really busy time for for a lot of folks. So, if there's desire for more of these, we will definitely try to get them, on the calendar. And if not, again, we're happy to help folks individually as well. So anything else to add to that?
I am just going to send out the registration for that next let's see, here we go. I'll put that link out to everybody if you would like to register for the next webinar here.
Okay. Thank you for that. We had one question that was essentially, is it possible to create a document with all the questions and answers not addressed so that we could all read later? Funny, we have sort of that. On the website here, we have this FAQ section, this kind of common questions, where when we get questions that we see more than once or that look really interesting, we try to add them here. And this is the place where we actually turn to when we're answering them as well, just so we're sure that we're giving you a real kind of consistent answer. And I know for a fact that the auditors, when they have a question, the first place that they turn to is the FAQs and the website and the guidance. This is one of the things that we do to make sure that we are all on the same page. So if you have questions, I would say the first thing to do is to read through the FAQs. We will look through the questions we've gotten today and try to add to the FAQs if we can. So with that, I think we're going to call it good. Thank you for your time. And again, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, everybody.
Muted. The organizer has ended the session, and this call will be disconnected. Goodbye.
Yep. The system automatically sends you a link, and so if you don't have it there, just go ahead and sign up again. So the qualification to implement the learning plan is certification. So there isn't no highly qualified definition for that. You just need to be a certificated teacher in order to implement a learning plan. Okay, now there's a difference in implementing the plan and then being the one that creates the learning objectives. And so the person, if it's math, the person, if that chart that Carl brought up, so right. Okay, needs to be, well, the highly qualified person needs to be involved in writing the objectives of the plan. There you go. Okay. Very good. Right. Oh, good. Good. Well, we will, there were a lot of folks attending and a lot of questions, and we will get a little more proficient at handling all the questions and getting back to people. So feel free, if you have any lingering questions, just to call us directly or email us, and we're happy to help. Yeah. Right, and that is a very fluid document that we add to it all the time as things we get further questions where we realize something needs to be clarified or whatever. So yes, it is a good resource. Oh, good! Yay! You're welcome. Bye bye.